The night I found my nephew hiding in a closet, covered in his grandparents' blood, was the night I realized my brother had finally crossed into hell and dragged everyone I loved with him. I had always been the responsible one. Growing up in Maple Creek, Nevada, a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, I learned early on that being Mitch Hale's older sister meant carrying the weight of his mistakes on my shoulders. Our parents, Richard and Elaine, owned the Golden Crust, a bakery famous throughout the county for its artisan bread. They poured their hearts into that place, waking up at 4 every morning to knead dough and shape loaves. They also poured their hearts into Mitch, their golden boy, their baby, the child who could do no wrong even when he was doing everything wrong. I left Maple Creek when I was 22, right after finishing my architecture degree. I told myself it was for career opportunities in San Francisco, but the truth was simpler and more painful. I needed to escape the suffocating cycle of Mitch's chaos and my parents' enabling. Every time Mitch got into trouble, which was often, they would call me. Cassidy, can you talk to your brother? Cassidy, can you lend him some money? Cassidy, can you fix this? And like a fool, I always tried. 6 years later, I had built a successful career as an architect. My firm had just landed a major contract to redesign a historic building downtown. I was presenting to the board when my phone started buzzing incessantly in my pocket. Mom and Dad. I silenced it, focusing on my presentation, on my life, on the future I had carefully constructed far away from Mitch's gravitational pull of destruction. After the meeting, I saw 7 missed calls and a voicemail. Mom's voice was shaky. Honey, it's about Mitch. He's gotten himself into something bad this time. Your father and we need to talk to you about. The message cut off abruptly. I called back immediately. No answer. I called again. Nothing. A cold dread settled in my stomach, the kind that comes from years of experience with Mitch's disasters. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just an image. The Golden Crust, with its lights off, a sign hanging crooked on the door that read closed indefinitely. And there, barely visible in the dim streetlight, a dark stain on the glass door that could only be blood. Below the image, a single line of text. Mitch screwed up big this time. I didn't think. I grabbed my purse, told my assistant I had a family emergency, and drove straight to the airport. On the red-eye flight to Nevada, I kept staring at that photo, zooming in on the blood stain, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. What had Mitch done now? Gambling debts? Drugs? Both? And why weren't my parents answering their phones? I landed in Reno at 2 in the morning and drove the hour to Maple Creek in a rental car, breaking every speed limit. The town was dead silent, just wind whistling through the empty streets and the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance. The Golden Crust sat dark on Main Street, exactly as it had appeared in that photo. I parked and approached slowly, my heart hammering. The front window was shattered, glass scattered across the sidewalk like crystal tears. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me first. Metallic, sharp, wrong. Blood mixed with the yeasty scent of bread dough. I fumbled for the light switch, but nothing happened. The electricity was cut off. Using my phone's flashlight, I stepped inside. The bakery looked like a tornado had torn through it. Display cases smashed, flour dusted across every surface like snow, half-formed loaves abandoned on the counter. Someone had been looking for something, and they hadn't been gentle about it. Mom, I called out, my voice cracking. Dad. The silence that answered was heavier than any sound. I found my mother's recipe book on the floor, its pages scattered and torn. Tucked between 2 pages was a small notebook I'd never seen before. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were lists, debts. Mitch's name appeared again and again, next to astronomical figures. 20,000 to the vultures, 15,000 to the vultures, another 30,000 to the vultures. At the bottom of one page, in my mother's handwriting, so shaky it was barely legible, she had written, Mitch has gone too far. They're going to kill us. The back of the bakery connected to the house where my parents lived, a small 2-bedroom cottage they'd owned for 30 years. I pushed through the connecting door, and the destruction was even worse. Furniture overturned, family photos smashed on the floor, the TV screen cracked like a spiderweb, and blood, so much blood. Splattered on the walls, pooled on the hardwood floor, handprints smeared across the doorframe where someone had tried to crawl away. I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed up. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, while my phone light cast grotesque shadows across the carnage. That's when I heard it. A tiny, muffled sob coming from my parents' bedroom. I forced myself to move, to walk down that hallway past the blood and the broken glass. The bedroom was dark, the curtains drawn. Another sob, this one from the closet. I approached it like I was approaching a wild animal, slowly, carefully, terrified of what I might find. When I opened the closet door, Jace was huddled in the corner behind my mother's old coats, his small body curled into a ball. He was 6 years old, Mitch's son from a relationship that had ended badly 3 years ago. My parents had gotten custody when Jace's mother, struggling with her own demons, had surrendered him. He was wearing Spider-Man pajamas that were now stiff with dried blood. His face was pale, his eyes wide and glassy with shock. "Jace," I whispered, kneeling down. "It's Aunt Cassidy. You're safe now." He didn't respond at first, just stared at me like he wasn't sure I was real. Then his small hand reached out and pointed at the wall behind me. I turned. In the dim light from my phone, I could see it. A massive blood stain, still wet in places, with drag marks leading toward the back door. "The monsters came," Jace whispered, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him. "The devils. They hurt Grandma and Grandpa. Daddy told them where to find them. Daddy helped them." I pulled Jace into my arms, and he was cold, so cold. I wrapped my jacket around him and carried him out of that house of horrors, past the blood and the broken dreams, out into the clean night air. As I buckled him into the rental car, I made a promise. I would find out what happened. I would find Mitch, and I would make sure he paid for every single thing he had done. The hospital in Maple Creek was small, just a dozen beds and an emergency room that usually dealt with farming accidents and the occasional bar fight. The nurse on duty took one look at Jace and called for a doctor immediately. They took him away on a gurney, and I stood there in the fluorescent waiting room, still covered in dust from the bakery, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't fill out the intake forms. That's when Detective Miles Corbin found me. He was in his 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He introduced himself, showed me his badge, and asked if we could talk. I nodded, too exhausted to do anything else. We sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs while Corbin pulled out a notebook. "Miss Hale, I need you to tell me everything you know about your brother Mitch." I stared at him. "Shouldn't you be looking for my parents?" His expression didn't change. "Miss Hale, we've been looking for your brother for 3 days. We found his car abandoned near a motel on the edge of town. We have reason to believe he's involved in what happened at your parents' house." "Involved?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "He didn't just get involved, Detective. According to my 6-year-old nephew, Mitch led those men straight to my parents. He sold them out." Corbin leaned back, studying me. "I am angry," I snapped. "I've spent my entire life cleaning up after Mitch, bailing him out, covering for him, believing his promises that he'd change. And now my parents are missing, probably dead, and their grandson is traumatized, and it's all because they loved him too much to ever say no." Corbin was quiet for a moment. "Then you know about the vultures." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I found Mom's notebook. The debts. Mitch owed them a fortune." "More than a fortune," Corbin said. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. Security camera footage from a convenience store. 3 men entering the store, 2 of them covered in tattoos, wearing leather jackets with a crow symbol on the back. Between them, looking strung out and terrified, was Mitch. The timestamp showed it was from 2 days ago. "The vultures are a loan sharking operation that's been operating out of Maple Creek for about 5 years, Corbin explained. "They target vulnerable people. Gamblers, addicts, anyone desperate enough to take their money. The interest rates are criminal, and their collection methods are worse. We've been trying to build a case against them, but witnesses have a habit of disappearing. Like my parents," I said flatly. Corbin didn't deny it. "I need you to think carefully, Miss Hale. Did your brother ever mention any of these men? Any names? Any locations?" Before I could answer, a doctor emerged from the emergency room. Jace was stable, physically. A few bruises, severe dehydration, but nothing permanently damaged on the outside. The inside was a different story. The doctor explained that Jace was suffering from acute traumatic stress. He wasn't speaking anymore, hadn't said a word since we arrived. The things he had witnessed, the doctor said carefully, would require extensive therapy. I stayed with Jace that night, curled up in a chair beside his hospital bed, while he slept fitfully, occasionally crying out for his grandparents. Every time he woke up screaming, I held his hand and promised him he was safe, even though I wasn't sure that was true, even though I knew the monsters were still out there, and one of them shared my blood. The next morning, I left Jace with a nurse and drove to the Rusty Nail, a dive bar on the outskirts of town where Mitch had always spent too much time. It was barely noon, but the place was already open, serving cheap beer to day drinkers who had nowhere better to be. The interior was exactly as depressing as I remembered, all stained wood and neon signs advertising brands of beer that had gone out of business decades ago. The bartender was an older man with a face like worn leather, someone who had clearly seen every kind of trouble that walks through a bar door. His name tag said Sal. I sat down at the bar and ordered a whiskey I didn't intend to drink. Sal poured it without comment. "I'm looking for information about Mitch Hale," I said, sliding a $50 bill across the bar. Sal glanced at the money but didn't touch it. "You his sister? How did you know? You got the same eyes, same stubborn look." He picked up a glass and started polishing it, a nervous habit. "Look, lady, I liked your parents, good people. Your brother, though, he brought nothing but trouble through that door. I need to know where he is. Even if I knew, which I don't, I'm not sure I'd tell you. The people he's mixed up with, they don't play games. I've seen what they do to people who cross them. I leaned forward. They took my parents. They traumatized my nephew. I don't care how dangerous they are. I need to find them. Sal studied me for a long moment, then sighed. Your brother was in deep. Gambling debts that went back years. He'd bet on anything. Sports, cards, dice. Always convinced the next big win was just around the corner. When he couldn't pay, he'd borrow from the vultures. Then he couldn't pay them, so he'd borrow more to cover the interest. Classic spiral. Did he ever say anything about them? Where they operate? Sal hesitated, then reached under the bar and pulled out a scrap of paper. He scribbled an address on it and slid it across to me. There's an old warehouse on the east side of town. Abandoned meatpacking plant. Word is, the vultures use it for storage. I don't know if your brother's there, but it's a place to start. He pushed the 50 back toward me. Keep your money. And be careful. These people, they're not just criminals, they're psychopaths. The warehouse was exactly where Sal said it would be, a hulking structure of rusted metal and broken windows at the end of a dead-end road. I parked a block away and approached on foot, grateful for the dying light that provided some cover. The main doors were chained shut, but a side entrance had been forced open at some point, the lock dangling uselessly. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous and dark, lit only by slivers of moonlight filtering through gaps in the roof. The air smelled of rust and rot and something chemical I couldn't identify. I used my phone sparingly, just quick flashes to avoid tripping over debris. Along one wall, someone had set up a makeshift living space. A sleeping bag, some empty food containers, and scattered papers. I knelt down and examined the papers. Bills, all addressed to Mitch. Credit card statements with maxed out limits. And there, tucked under the sleeping bag, a journal. I opened it with trembling hands and started reading by the light of my phone. The entries started a year ago. Mitch's handwriting, always messy, now barely legible. He wrote about the debts, about the vultures, about his escalating fear, but he also wrote about resentment toward our parents. How they'd always expected him to be like me, perfect Cassidy who never made mistakes. How he felt suffocated by their love, their constant worry, their inability to let him fail. The entries grew darker. He wrote about using drugs to cope, about stealing from the bakery's cash register, about lying to Mom and Dad's faces. And then, in an entry from 3 weeks ago, he wrote something that made my blood run cold. They want their money. All of it. I don't have it, but I know what they want more. Information. Access. The bakery would be a good front for their operation. Maybe if I offer them that, they'll forgive the debt. Maybe Mom and Dad would understand. They always forgive me. I closed the journal, rage burning through my chest. He had planned this. He had offered up our parents' business, their livelihood, their legacy, to save his own skin. And when that wasn't enough, when the vultures wanted more, he had offered up our parents themselves. I was so focused on the journal that I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until it was too late. A hand clamped over my mouth, another arm wrapped around my waist, yanking me backward. I tried to scream, but the hand pressed harder, cutting off my air. A man's voice, rough and amused, spoke directly into my ear. Well, another hail. You people just don't know when to quit, do you? I was dragged deeper into the warehouse, toward a section that had clearly been renovated. Fluorescent lights hung from the ceiling, illuminating what looked like an office space. Desks, filing cabinets, and 3 men sitting in chairs, watching me with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. The man holding me shoved me forward, and I stumbled but managed to stay on my feet. One of the men stood up, and I recognized him from the security footage. Tall, muscular, with a massive crow tattoo covering half his face. His eyes were flat and dead, the eyes of someone who had stopped seeing other people as human a long time ago. Cassidy Hale, he said, like we were old friends. Your brother talks about you all the time. His perfect sister who escaped to the big city. Left him here to rot. Where are my parents? The words came out stronger than I felt. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You know, your brother asked me the same thing before he ran. Seemed real concerned about them all of a sudden. Funny how guilt works, isn't it? Shows up right after you've sold out your own family. You killed them. He shrugged. They were a means to an end. Your brother owed us a substantial amount of money. He couldn't pay. So we took what he valued most. Turns out, he didn't value it as much as we thought. He gave them up pretty easily when we explained the alternative. I felt sick. What alternative? We offered to take him instead. Physical labor, working off his debt. It would have taken years, sure, but he'd be alive. He chose to give us your parents' location instead. Even drew us a little map, very helpful. The rage I'd been suppressing exploded. I lunged at him, not thinking, not planning, just pure fury driving me forward. I managed to get close enough to rake my nails across his face before the other men grabbed me, yanking me back. The man with the crow tattoo touched his bleeding cheek and laughed. You got spirit. More than your brother, that's for sure. But spirit doesn't pay debts. He gestured to the men holding me. Take her to the room. We'll decide what to do with her later. They dragged me down a hallway to a small storage room and threw me inside. The door slammed shut, and I heard a lock click into place. I was alone in the dark with nothing but my phone and my rage. I pulled out my phone and called Detective Corbin. He answered on the second ring. I found them, I said. The vultures. I'm at the warehouse on East Industrial. You need to get here now. And detective? Bring everyone. I spent the next 20 minutes in that dark room, listening to muffled voices and footsteps, planning what I would say to Mitch when I found him. Because I would find him. He couldn't hide forever, not in a town this small. And when I did, he would answer for everything. The sound of sirens cut through my thoughts. Shouts, running footsteps, then a loud crash as the police breached the warehouse. More shouts, the distinctive sound of handcuffs clicking shut. Finally, the storage room door opened, and Detective Corbin stood there with a flashlight. You're either very brave or very stupid, he said, helping me to my feet. Maybe both. Did you get them? The ones who were here, yes. Including their leader, Marcus Trey. That crow tattoo makes him pretty distinctive. But Miss Hale, we need to talk about your brother. I followed Corbin out of the warehouse. Police cars and ambulances filled the parking lot, their lights painting everything in red and blue. Several men in handcuffs were being loaded into squad cars, Marcus among them. He saw me and smiled that dead smile, and I had to resist the urge to run over and finish what I'd started. Corbin led me to his car and pulled out a file. During the raid, one of Trey's men tried to make a deal. He gave us information in exchange for reduced charges. He told us where your parents were buried. The world tilted. I gripped the car door to stay upright. Where? Pine Grove Forest, about 10 miles north of here. There's an old logging road that leads to a clearing. We're organizing a search party now. Corbin paused. Miss Hale, you should know, the informant also told us your brother is the one who led us there. He contacted one of the gang members yesterday, said he wanted to make a deal. He'd tell us where your parents were buried if we granted him immunity. I stared at Corbin. Immunity? He thinks he can just walk away from this? He's claiming coercion. Says the vultures forced him to cooperate under threat of death. That he had no choice. Corbin's expression was skeptical. It's not going to work. We have evidence of his involvement, including testimony from the gang members themselves. But he is cooperating, which means he'll likely get a reduced sentence instead of immunity. I don't care about his sentence, I said quietly. I just want to see him, face to face. I want him to look me in the eye and explain why he did this. Corbin studied me for a moment, then nodded. When we locate him, I'll let you know. The search party left at dawn. I insisted on going with them, and Corbin, perhaps sensing I wouldn't be dissuaded, allowed it. We drove in a convoy of police vehicles, winding through back roads until we reached the forest. The logging road was barely visible, overgrown with brush and weeds. We continued on foot, following the trail deeper into the woods. It didn't take long to find the clearing. It was small, ringed by tall pines that blocked out most of the sunlight. In the center, barely concealed by a thin layer of dirt and pine needles, were two obvious graves. The forensics team immediately got to work while I stood at the edge of the clearing, unable to move, unable to breathe. They confirmed it within an hour. 2 bodies, male and female, matching the descriptions of Richard and Elaine Hale. Cause of death appeared to be blunt force trauma. They'd been beaten to death and buried in a shallow grave like they were nothing, like their lives meant nothing. I fell to my knees beside the graves. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The grief was too big, too heavy, crushing my chest until I thought my ribs would crack. I just knelt there, staring at the disturbed earth, thinking about all the times I'd complained about my parents' calls, all the times I'd rolled my eyes at their requests, all the times I'd wished they would just stop enabling Mitch and let him face consequences. Now they'd face the ultimate consequence for their love. That's when I heard the branch snap behind me. I turned, and there he was, Mitch, standing at the edge of the clearing like a ghost. He looked terrible, thin and pale, his clothes dirty and torn. But it was his eyes that shocked me. They were wild, desperate, the eyes of a cornered animal. Cassidy, he said, and his voice cracked. I didn't mean for this to happen. You have to believe me. I stood up slowly. The police officers around us had noticed him too, hands moving to their weapons, but Corbin held up a hand, signaling them to wait. This was my moment, and he was giving it to me. You didn't mean for this to happen, I repeated, walking toward Mitch. You didn't mean to gamble away everything. You didn't mean to borrow money from criminals. You didn't mean to offer up our parents as collateral. Which part exactly didn't you mean, Mitch? He took a step back. I was desperate. They were going to kill me. So you let them kill Mom and Dad instead. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just had more time, I could pay them back, and everything would be fine. His words were coming faster now, tumbling over each other. I never thought they'd actually hurt them. I thought they'd just scare them, use the bakery for a few deals, and then let them go. You thought wrong. I was close enough now to see the tears running down his face, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity, nothing. Do you know what Jace saw that night? Do you know what nightmares he's going to have for the rest of his life because of you? Mitch's face crumpled. I didn't know Jace was there. I swear, Cassidy, I didn't know. It doesn't matter. Nothing you say matters anymore. I was shouting now, years of suppressed rage finally breaking free. You spent our entire lives taking and taking and taking. You took Mom and Dad's money, their patience, their love. You took my peace of mind, my career opportunities, my relationships. Every single thing I had, you found a way to take it. And it still wasn't enough. So you took the only things they had left, their lives. Mitch was sobbing now, backing away from me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught. You're sorry there are consequences. I followed him, step by step. You know what the worst part is? They died still loving you. They died thinking they'd failed you, that if they just tried harder, loved you more, given you one more chance, you could have been saved. They never understood that you didn't want to be saved. You just wanted to take. He turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The police had formed a perimeter around the clearing. Mitch spun in a circle, looking for an exit, and I saw the moment panic turn to something else, something darker. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun, rusty and old but still functional. The officers immediately drew their weapons, shouting commands, but Mitch wasn't listening. He pointed the gun at me, his hand shaking. You think you're better than me, he said, his voice breaking. Perfect Cassidy who never makes mistakes. But you abandoned us. You left us here, and this is what happened. This is your fault too. I looked at the gun, then back at Mitch's face, and I felt nothing but pity. Not for what he'd become, but for what he'd never been. He was right about one thing. I had left. I'd built a life far away from his chaos. But I'd also spent years answering their calls, sending money, trying to help. I'd done everything I could, and it was never enough because Mitch didn't want help. He wanted enablement. Go ahead, I said quietly. Pull the trigger. Add me to the list of people you've destroyed. But it won't change anything. It won't erase what you did. It won't bring them back. For a moment, I thought he might actually do it. His finger tightened on the trigger, and I saw my life flashing before my eyes, not in memories but in regrets. All the things I'd never do, the life I'd never live. And then I thought of Jace, alone in that hospital bed, and I knew I couldn't die. Not yet. Not when he still needed me. The gunshot was deafening. I flinched, expecting pain, but none came. When I opened my eyes, Mitch was on the ground, clutching his shoulder. Detective Corbin stood a few feet away, his gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Other officers rushed forward, kicking Mitch's gun away and cuffing his hands behind his back. Mitch was screaming, a high-pitched wail of pain and rage and despair. They hauled him to his feet and started dragging him toward the police cars. As they passed me, he looked at me one last time, and whatever plea he was about to make died on his lips when he saw my expression. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't anything. I just watched him disappear into the back of a squad car like he was a stranger I'd passed on the street. Corbin approached me, holstering his weapon. You okay? I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. Are they really gone? He didn't pretend not to understand. The coroner confirmed it. I'm sorry, Miss Hale. For what it's worth, the evidence suggests they died quickly. It wasn't prolonged. It was a small comfort, but I clung to it. At least they hadn't suffered for long. At least in their last moments, they'd had each other. The next few days passed in a blur. My parents' bodies were released to a funeral home, and I made arrangements for their burial in the town cemetery, near the old oak tree where my mother used to take me for picnics. The service was small, just a few dozen people from town who'd known them. I stood at the graveside with Jace, holding his small hand in mine, and tried to find words that would make sense of this. But there were no words. There was just grief, heavy and suffocating, and the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. Mitch was charged with 2 counts of accessory to murder, along with a laundry list of other crimes. His court-appointed lawyer tried to argue that he'd been coerced, but the evidence was overwhelming. The journal I'd found, the testimony from gang members, the security footage, the prosecutor laid it all out in meticulous detail, building a case that left no room for doubt. Mitch had knowingly and willingly participated in my parents' deaths to save himself. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the back row with Jace beside me. He'd started speaking again, slowly, carefully, working with a therapist to process his trauma. Sometimes he'd draw pictures of what he'd seen, and the therapist would help him understand that it wasn't his fault, that he was safe now. On the witness stand, when asked to identify the man who'd brought the devils to his grandparents' house, Jace pointed at Mitch without hesitation. That was my daddy, he said in his small voice. But he's not my daddy anymore. Daddies protect you. He didn't protect anyone. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Mitch was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, he turned to look at me one last time, but I was already leaving. I had nothing left to say to him. After the trial, I returned to San Francisco with Jace. I'd started the legal process to adopt him, and my lawyer assured me it would go through without issue. Jace's biological mother had signed away her rights years ago, and with Mitch in prison, I was the only family he had left. I sold my small apartment and bought a house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a backyard where Jace could play. I put up pictures of my parents in every room, making sure Jace would remember them as they were, not as they'd died. Detective Corbin called me a few months later with news. The entire Vulture's operation had been dismantled. Marcus Trey and his top lieutenants were serving life sentences. The remaining members had scattered, their network destroyed. The case had become something of a sensation in law enforcement circles, an example of how cooperation between local and federal agencies could take down organized crime. Corbin had been commended for his work. "That's good," I said, and I meant it. At least something positive came from all this. "How's the kid doing?" Corbin asked. "Better. He still has nightmares sometimes, but they're getting less frequent. He's starting to make friends at school. His therapist says he's showing remarkable resilience." I paused. "I think he's going to be okay. Eventually. And you?" "I'm surviving. That's all I can do right now." "That's more than surviving, Miss Hale. That's living." "There's a difference." After we hung up, I went to check on Jace. He was in his room, building an elaborate structure out of blocks, his tongue sticking out in concentration the way my father's used to when he was kneading dough. When he saw me, he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Look, Aunt Cassidy," he said, gesturing at his creation. "I built a castle. It's got really high walls so the bad guys can't get in." "That's perfect, sweetheart. Very strong walls." He nodded seriously. "You always need strong walls. That's how you stay safe." That evening, after Jace was asleep, I sat in my home office and looked at the architectural plans I'd been working on. A new project, a community center for at-risk youth in Maple Creek. I'd pitched it to the town council, and they'd approved it. It would be called the Golden Crust Community Center, in memory of my parents. A place where kids like Jace, or even like Mitch had been, could go when they needed help. Where they could learn skills, get counseling, find support. Maybe if something like that had existed when Mitch was young, things would have been different. Probably not, but maybe. I thought about the structure a lot, what it represented. Strong walls to keep the bad things out, but also doors that opened, windows that let in light. A place of safety, but also possibility. That's what I wanted for Jace, for myself, for everyone who'd been touched by tragedy. Not just survival, but a future. One Sunday morning, 6 months after the trial, I drove with Jace back to Maple Creek. We visited my parents' graves, placing fresh flowers on the headstones. The cemetery was peaceful, surrounded by the same pine trees that covered most of Nevada. Jace talked to his grandparents, telling them about school, about his new friends, about the castle he was building in his room. "I miss you," he said simply, touching my mother's headstone. "But Aunt Cassidy takes good care of me, just like you did." After the cemetery, we drove past the old bakery. New owners had bought it and were renovating. The broken windows had been replaced, the blood cleaned away. Soon it would be a bakery again, selling bread to the community. Life went on, even after tragedy. Especially after tragedy. As we drove back to San Francisco, Jace fell asleep in the back seat, his head resting against the window. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, this small person who'd lost so much but kept going anyway. He was stronger than any of us had been, braver, more resilient. He would grow up knowing the truth about his father, about what people were capable of when they chose themselves over everyone else. But he would also grow up knowing what love looked like, real love, the kind that shows up, that protects, that sacrifices without expecting anything in return. I thought about Mitch sometimes, locked away in his cell, finally facing consequences he couldn't charm or lie his way out of. I wondered if he felt remorse or just self-pity. I wondered if he understood the magnitude of what he'd destroyed. Probably not. People like Mitch rarely did. They were always the victim in their own story, always wronged, never wrong. But I didn't hate him anymore. Hatred required energy I didn't have to spare. I needed all my energy for Jace, for building our life together, for making sure the cycle of enabling and destruction ended with my generation. I couldn't change the past, couldn't bring my parents back, couldn't undo the trauma Jace had endured. But I could make sure his future was different. I could be the adult he needed, setting boundaries, providing stability, showing him that love didn't mean accepting the unacceptable. 6 months later, on a bright autumn day, Jace and I attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the Golden Crust Community Center. The whole town turned out, and the mayor gave a speech about my parents and their legacy of kindness. Jace got to dig the first shovelful of dirt, and he took the task very seriously, using both hands to lift the heavy shovel. When the crowd applauded, he beamed with pride. That night, tucking Jason to bed, he looked up at me with those solemn eyes he'd inherited from his grandmother. "Aunt Cassidy, do you think Grandma and Grandpa would be proud of us?" I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "I know they would be. You're exactly the kind of person they hoped you'd become. Kind, brave, strong. What about my daddy? Do you think he's proud?" I considered lying, giving him a comforting answer. But Jace deserved the truth. Age-appropriate but honest. "I don't know, sweetheart. Your daddy made some very bad choices, but you're not responsible for his choices. You're only responsible for your own. And you're making good ones." He thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "I'm going to keep making good choices. That's how you build strong walls, right?" "Right. And it's how you build a good life." As I left his room, leaving the nightlight on the way he liked, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness, not yet. The wounds were too fresh for that. But peace. The knowledge that we would be okay, that we were building something better from the ruins of what had been destroyed. I walked to my own room and looked at the photograph on my nightstand. My parents, taken at Jace's 4th birthday party. Both of them laughing at something he'd said. They looked so happy, so full of life. They'd loved too much, enabled too much, paid too much for their unconditional love. But they'd also given me the tools to break that cycle. They'd shown me what love looked like, even if they'd gotten confused about how to express it with Mitch. I could take the good parts, the real love, and leave behind the enabling. I could show Jace a different way. The next year brought changes. The community center opened to widespread acclaim. Jace started 2nd grade and made the honor roll. My architecture firm won several awards for our socially conscious designs. I started dating again, cautiously, someone who understood trauma and loss and didn't run from it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. I only saw Mitch once more, 2 years after his sentencing. He'd requested a meeting, and after much deliberation, I agreed. The prison visiting room was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined, all gray, concrete, and harsh lighting. Mitch looked older, his hair graying at the temples, deep lines around his eyes. Prison had aged him a decade. "Thank you for coming," he said when I sat down across from him. I almost didn't. "What do you want, Mitch?" He took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of therapy in here, facing things I should have faced a long time ago. And I wanted to tell you, I know what I did. I know I destroyed our family. I know I can never make it right. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. Too late, but I understand." I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion. "Okay, how's Jace?" "He's good. He's healing. He asks about you sometimes." Mitch's eyes filled with tears. "Tell him I love him. Tell him I'm sorry I wasn't the father he deserved. I'll tell him you're sorry. I don't think I'll mention the love part. Love isn't just words, Mitch. It's actions. And your actions nearly destroyed him." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "I know." We sat in silence for a few more minutes, and then I stood up. "Goodbye, Mitch. Cassidy, wait." He reached out but couldn't touch me across the barrier. "Will you ever forgive me?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "No, I don't think I will, but I don't hate you anymore. I just feel sorry for you. You had everything, and you threw it all away. You'll spend the rest of your life in here, and meanwhile, Jace and I will keep living. We'll keep building. We'll be happy. And you'll have missed all of it because you couldn't stop making terrible choices." I left the prison and didn't look back. On the drive home, I felt lighter, like I'd finally put down a weight I'd been carrying for decades. Mitch was no longer my burden. He was his own, and he would carry it alone. Years passed. Jace grew into a remarkable young man, kind and thoughtful, with his grandmother's laugh and his grandfather's steady hands. He decided he wanted to become a therapist, to help other kids who'd experienced trauma. I couldn't have been more proud. On his 18th birthday, we went back to Maple Creek together and visited my parents' graves. Jace placed flowers and told them about his college acceptance, his plans for the future, all the ways their legacy lived on through him. As we walked back to the car, Jace put his arm around my shoulders. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For saving me. For raising me. For showing me what real family looks like." I hugged him tight. "You saved yourself, kiddo. I just gave you a safe place to do it." That night, back in San Francisco, I stood on my balcony and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in a prison cell, Mitch was living with his choices. And here, in the life I'd built from the ashes of tragedy, Jace and I were thriving. We'd taken the worst thing that could have happened and transformed it into something meaningful. We'd honored my parents by being better, by choosing different, by breaking the cycle. The devil had left his scars on all of us, but scars were proof of survival, of healing, of strength. We wore them not with shame but with pride, evidence that we'd walked through hell and come out the other side. And every day we chose to keep walking, to keep building, to keep loving in healthy ways, was a victory. That was the real ending. Not revenge, not hatred, not even forgiveness. Just the choice to live well despite everything, to take the broken pieces and create something new and beautiful, to make sure that the people who'd been taken too soon hadn't died for nothing. Their legacy lived on in Jace, in the community center, in every choice I made to be better than the circumstances that had tried to define us. I thought about calling Detective Corbin to tell him how well things had turned out, but I realized he probably already knew. People like him, who spent their lives dealing with tragedy, understood that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. And Jace and I, we were on that journey together, one step at a time, one day at a time, building our strong walls and open doors, creating a life worth living from the ruins of the one we'd lost.